Warren Holt watched a woman flip open a water-stained leather book to a random page in the back corner of his shop, read 4 lines under her breath, and go pale enough that he came out from behind the counter to check on her. She left without buying anything, whispering an apology, clutching her phone like she needed to call someone immediately. 3 days later, she was back, shaken and apologetic again, this time to tell him that the passage she had read, a strange, oddly specific paragraph about a house fire caused by a space heater left running too close to curtains, had described almost exactly what happened to her neighbor's home 2 nights after she read it. Warren had owned the shop for 11 years and had never once believed in anything he could not put a price tag on, priding himself on being the least superstitious person anyone in his family knew, which is exactly why the pattern eventually became impossible to ignore. He started keeping a private log, unofficial and half embarrassed, tracking every customer who opened that same book, a 19th century volume with no title on the spine, and every strange coincidence that followed within roughly 2 weeks. By the time he called the agency, he had 11 entries, and in 7 of them, the passage the customer happened to land on described, in vague but recognizable detail, something that went on to happen to that specific person or someone close to them. Agents Ethan Cole and Victoria Hayes were asked to determine one thing before Warren considered simply burning the book to be done with it: whether the pattern was real, and if it was, whether the book was predicting these events or somehow causing them. Cole and Hayes drove to the shop themselves, rather than asking Warren to ship the item to the agency, both wanting to see how the book behaved in its own environment before removing it from the context that seemed to trigger the pattern. Cole examined the binding under a jeweler's loupe, while Hayes carefully turned the brittle pages one at a time, both agents present in the room as Warren walked them through his log entry by entry, pointing out which passage had matched which incident. The book had no author listed anywhere, no publisher's mark, and no consistent chapter structure, reading instead like a loose collection of short, unconnected accounts, none of them dated, none of them explained. While Cole worked the binding, Hayes noticed something Warren's own log had missed entirely: a faint set of pencil marks in the margin beside several of the passages, tally marks rather than words, as though someone long ago had been counting how many times each specific page had been opened. She asked Warren whether he had ever noticed customers gravitating back toward the same handful of pages more than others, and he admitted, somewhat uncomfortably, that certain pages did seem to attract repeat visits, people coming back weeks later insisting they needed to reread something without being able to say exactly why. Hayes asked Warren to let her open the book at random herself, the same way each troubled customer had, and the page she landed on described a minor traffic collision at an intersection with a broken streetlight. Cole immediately cross-referenced local incident reports and found nothing yet, no accident matching it in the past 2 weeks. He told Hayes plainly that they would simply have to wait and watch, and for the next several days, both agents kept the passage in mind while reviewing new incident reports as they came in, until 11 days later, an accident matching the description almost exactly occurred 4 blocks from the shop, at an intersection where the streetlight had, in fact, been reported broken the week before. This connected directly to what Warren had asked them to determine. The book was not simply describing events that had already happened somewhere and might coincidentally resemble a new one. It was producing specific, checkable details in advance. Details that later matched real incidents closely enough that chance alone became difficult to accept as an explanation, especially once agents themselves had watched one unfold in real time. Hayes tracked the book's provenance through an estate auction house 2 counties over, the same auction where Warren had purchased it 11 years earlier, and found the auction had been liquidating the belongings of a reclusive historian named Augustus Farrow, who died alone in his home with no immediate family to claim his library. Rather than simply pulling Farrow's death certificate from a database, Hayes drove out to the small town where he had lived and spoke directly with the county coroner who had handled the case at the time, still working there decades later. The coroner remembered Farrow specifically, describing him as a man locals considered strange even before his death, known for spending years compiling handwritten accounts of local disasters, accidents, and tragedies, always insisting to anyone who would listen that he was not inventing the stories, but transcribing them from somewhere he refused to explain. Hayes returned to the shop a second time to interview 3 of the 11 customers from Warren's log directly, rather than relying on his secondhand summaries. 2 of them declined to discuss it further, visibly unsettled just being asked. The third, a retired schoolteacher, agreed to meet Hayes at a nearby diner and described the experience in more detail than Warren's notes had captured, saying the passage she read had not simply predicted an event, but had described her own reaction to it with unsettling precision, down to a specific sentence she later found herself saying out loud at the moment it happened, as though she had been reading a script for her own life rather than a warning about it. Cole visited Farrow's former property in person, now abandoned and scheduled for demolition, and found the remains of a small writing room in the back of the house, walls still lined with empty shelving that matched the dimensions of similar leather-bound volumes, suggesting Warren's book had originally been one of several, not a singular object. A neighbor who still lived across the road, elderly but sharp, told Cole that Farrow had once shown her a passage from one of his books describing, in detail, the exact circumstances of her husband's death nearly a year before it happened, and that she had dismissed it at the time as a morbid old man's fixation, only to think about it constantly in the years since. The turn came when Cole and Hayes compared the handwriting inside Warren's book against a sample of Farrow's known writing, pulled from a local historical society archive, expecting confirmation that Farrow had written it himself. The handwriting did not match. Multiple distinct handwriting styles appeared throughout the book, none of them Farrow's, spanning what a document specialist estimated was well over a century of different ink types and paper aging, far longer than Farrow himself had been alive to write anything. Farrow had not authored the book. He had, at some point, become one of its readers, adding his own entry to a volume that had already been collecting these accounts long before he was born, exactly the way Warren's own customers had unknowingly been doing for the past 11 years, each of them reading a passage seated by whoever, or whatever, wrote in that book before them. Warren has agreed to stop selling the book and to keep it quietly stored in a locked case rather than displayed for browsing, though he admitted to Hayes that removing something so profitable from a shop he depends on financially is not a decision he can sustain forever without help. Hayes photographed every page of the book before it went into storage, page by page, planning to have the tally marks and handwriting samples analyzed further once the agency's document specialist has time, hoping the pattern of repeat readings might reveal something about how new entries actually get added, since no one has ever admitted to writing in the book themselves. The agency has requested access to the remaining shelving space at Farrow's condemned property before demolition proceeds, hoping to determine whether any additional volumes from the same collection might still be recoverable, and whether removing all of them from public reach might actually stop new entries from continuing to appear. Cole flagged one detail in his closing report that Hayes has not been able to stop thinking about since, that the retired schoolteacher's passage, the one describing her own reaction word for word, was written in handwriting that the document specialist tentatively matched to ink and paper aging, consistent with only the past few years, far too recent for Farrow or any of his contemporaries, meaning someone has been adding to the book well within living memory, and possibly still is. Cole's closing note observes that some books are not written once and read many times, but rather written continuously, one frightened reader's handwriting at a time, each of them believing they are only a witness when they are, in fact, already being asked to contribute the next entry. The agency's next case arrived before Cole had finished filing the paperwork on Warren's shop. A groundskeeper at a private estate 2 states away called to report that an ornamental garden hedge, trimmed into the same exact shape for over 60 years according to old photographs, had somehow regrown overnight into a completely different, far more elaborate design that no one on staff had cut, insisting on the phone that he had checked the property himself less than 6 hours earlier, and the hedge had still been its normal shape at the time. He wanted to know if someone could come look at it before he had to explain to his employer why he could not simply say who or what had done the trimming.